to Math Blossoms We're Growing in Mathematics is Natural. I'm the teacher, Miss G, and for today's lesson, we're going to talk about how to use the slope formula to calculate slope using ordered pairs, and also how to identify slope from equations, different types of linear equations as well. Now, let's go ahead and get started by asking the question of the day, which is, how do we find the slope from two ordered pairs? Okay, so as you can see here, we have a formula. It's called m equals, because m represents the slope. The second y, that's what the y sub 2 is how we would say that. The second y minus the first y over the second x minus the first x. So if you don't understand what the second y and the first y and all of that is, I'm going to explain that in just a moment. But we can use this with graphs. We can use this with ordered pairs. And if you don't know how to calculate slopes without a formula from graphs and tables, you might want to watch that video first and then come back to this one to learn how to use the formula. All right, so what do we got going on here? We've got, oops, is it not working? There we go. Oops, did I go too fast? There we go. Okay, let's first read the points from left to right, fill in the values in the x1, the first x, and the y1 positions in the formula with the first point. Next, fill the values in the x sub 2, y sub 2, or the second x and the second y positions with the second point. Then subtract the numbers in the numerator and subtract the numbers in the denominator. Always simplify or reduce the ratio if necessary. Okay, so that sounds kind of complicated, but after I show you, it won't be quite so confusing. All right, here's our formula. M equals the second y minus the first y over the second x minus the first x. So here's our first ordered pair. Now, we need to know, let me get we'll use blue. Okay, we need to know what our first y, our second y. So when we're reading our points, we're reading our points from left to right. Okay, so this is the first ordered pair. This is the first point, okay? And this one here is the second point, the second ordered pair. So if I was labeling this, I would say this would be my x, my first x, and my first y. And this would be my second x and my second y. Now, we have to label them at first because just to keep it straight in our brains, but after you learn this, you won't have to label it every time. You'll just know what to do. But basically, once you know what you're doing, this gets easier and easier, but it does take some practice. So I highly recommend that you practice this quite a bit to get better at this. Okay, so let's just plug it into this formula where it goes, right? So m equals the second y, and what is our second y? Well, our second y is 10. And it says to subtract the first y, right? So minus the first y, and our first y is -2. Now, since I have a minus there, I'm going to put the -2 in a parentheses so that we don't get our negative mixed up with our minus there. And that's what goes on the top of our ratio. That's our second y minus our first y. Now we're going to do the same thing with our second x minus our first x. Okay, so next time I do this on the next one, maybe I'll do different colors for the y's and the x's. That might make it a little easier to see. Okay, so the -11 is our second x, so that goes first. And again, the formula says to subtract, right? So we're going to do subtract. And then the first x is a 19. Okay, so if we plug that into our calculators, into our Desmos calculators, 10 minus -2 is actually a 12. And then -11 minus 19 is actually -30. Okay, and so if you want to check yourself with the Desmos calculator, feel free to do that. So now that you've done the calculations, now we just need to simplify. Now, I do want to point something out. I realize that the top number of my ratio is positive and the bottom number is negative. If one of the values of your ratio is negative, that makes the entire slope negative. But if I had a negative on both sections, like for instance, if this was negative and this was negative, if the 12 was negative also, then a negative divided by a negative makes a positive. So if you have two negatives going on in your ratio, that's really a positive. Because remember, a ratio like this, a fraction, is like a division problem. The numerator divided by the denominator, right? And anytime you divide a negative by a negative, you're going to get a positive answer. But if one of the numbers, the top, the numerator, or the bottom, the denominator, if one of them is negative, then that makes the slope negative. Okay, so we do have that going on. The 30 is negative, the 12 is not, so that means the entire fraction, the entire ratio is a negative. All right, so now we need to simplify this. We can divide 6 into both of these. If I divide 6 into 12, I get a 2. And if I divide a 6 into 30, I get a 5. So that's a simple way to find it. And so our slope is negative 2/5. All right, so that's a good one. Now let's try a different one. Okay, this one, we'll change colors. Let's use green. Okay, again, we have, we're going to use different colors actually for this one. So we have our first Y here and our second Y. We'll make that green. Okay, and then we'll use red for the other one. Okay, so the first X and the second X. I don't know if this is going to help you guys see this or not. Oops, second X, not Y. Let's turn that Y into an X. There we go. Second X. Okay, so let's plug it into our formula over here. So we have M equals the second Y, which is 3, minus the first Y, which is also a 3. And now we're going to do the X values. The second X is a 20, and we're going to subtract the first X, which is a 19. Again, you're just following the formula over here. So you're just, looking over here, making sure the numbers are in the right places and doing that subtraction. Okay, so when we do this subtraction, the X's are going to give us a 0, or sorry, the Y's are going to give us a 0. The X's are going to give us a 1. And 0 divided by a 1 is just a 0. So the slope is a 0, which means this is a horizontal line. We know that all horizontal lines have a 0 slope. And also, if you watched the video before this on how to find the slope of graphs and tables, I talked about how the Y values are always the same in a horizontal line. So that's why the 3's are the same there. Okay, let's try another one. Okay, this one, I'm going to run out of colors in a minute. Okay, we'll use this color. All right, we're going to take the Y's. We'll just use the same color for everything. So this is X and Y, and these are my first points. So I'm going to label them with 1s. My X and Y over here is the second point. So I'm going to label those with 2s. Okay, so let's go ahead and do our subtraction. Second, following the formula, the second Y here is -4. And I'm going to subtract the first Y, which is a 7. On the bottom, the second, so again, I'm subtracting this minus this, right? And then on the bottom here, I'm going to subtract X, second X minus the first X. So that would be -6 minus a -4. And if you plug these in your calculator, -4 minus 7 is -11. And then -6 minus -4 is -2. So I was talking about this earlier. Whenever you have two negatives in your ratio, they kind of cancel out and become a positive. So you have a positive slope, 11 halves, and you cannot reduce that anymore. So that's the slope of this line. The last one, what other colors do I have? We haven't used purple. Okay, the last one, the first point is X, then Y. And if you forget which one comes first, guys, when you're reading these left to right, these points, the X value is like, if you know your alphabet, X comes before Y. So it's really in alphabetical order. If you forget, you know, which one's the X, which one's the Y, the first one when you're reading it left to right is always the X. Okay, and these are the second points, so we're going to label those with 2s. And then we're going to plug it in our formula here. The second y is 8, and we're going to subtract the first y, which is negative 13. And then on the bottom, we have the second x minus the first x, so we have 17 minus 17. And when we do that calculation, we end up with 21 on the top. 8 minus negative 13 is 21. And 17 minus 17 is 0. And when we plug that into our Desmos calculator, it's going to give us the word undefined. You cannot divide by zeros, which means this is a vertical line, because vertical lines always have the undefined slope. Vertical lines are straight up and down like that. And as I said in the video previously to this one, the video about slope with graphs and tables, I talked about how the x values are always the same on a vertical line. Just like over here on this, this horizontal line, the y values were the same. And on the vertical lines, the x values are the same. All right, so here are the answers. Let's check ourselves. We have -2/5, 0, 11 halves, and undefined. So we did them right. Okay, question, how do we find the slope from linear equations? Okay, we're going to talk about this in another video further on, but I just want to talk about the different types of equations first. Linear equations can be in multiple forms. We will discuss 4 of them. The first one is the slope-intercept form. And there are more than these. So these are just the 4 I'm discussing in this video, okay? The slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, where m represents the slope, y and x represents the points on that line, and then b represents what we call the y-intercept point. The next type is called standard form. That is the ax plus by equals c, where a, b, and c are numerical and x and y are just x and y. And in standard form, we'll talk about that in just a moment. Horizontal line equations is y equals some kind of number. Remember I said in horizontal lines, the y's are always the same value. Well, whatever value that is, that's going to be in your equation. So like, for instance, if the values for my y's were all 7s, my equation would be y equals 7. And that's it. It's a very short equation. There is no x in the equation for horizontal lines. For vertical lines, there is no y. For vertical lines, it's x equals some constant number, and that number is whatever the x values are in all of your points. Remember, in vertical lines, all of your x values are the same. Now let's go back up here to slope-intercept form first. In the slope-intercept form of a linear equation, the slope m is the number that is being multiplied times the x value. So if you're just trying to identify your slope from that equation, you're going to go straight to where the x is and look at the number next to it. And whatever that number is being multiplied times the x, that is your slope. In a standard form equation, it's a little bit more complex. In the standard form of an equation, the slope is the opposite sign of the a number divided by the b value. So in your standard form equation, you're going to have a number where that a is and a number where that b is. So what you should do is take the number that the a is, change its sign. So if it's negative, change it to positive. If it's positive, change it to negative. And then divide it by the b, and that will give you your slope ratio for the standard form equations. Let's practice this a little bit. What are the slopes of the equations? So let's look at the horizontal line equation first. And we know that horizontal lines have a slope of 0. So we need to be able to recognize that that is a horizontal line. And since horizontal lines all have the same y values, then you know that the equation is just y equals whatever that number is. Now, one of the things about linear equations is most of the time you will have both the x and the y in that equation. So when you're looking at a linear equation and you don't see one of those variables, you know it has to be either horizontal or vertical. Okay, so look for the two variables x and y in your linear equation. If they're there, you know it's not a horizontal or vertical. But if one of them's missing, it's either horizontal or vertical, right? And so x equals a number like 8 will be a vertical line, and we have to remember that vertical line equations have a slope that is undefined. And this is just to remember about the Hoy and the Vux. Remember Hoy and Vux. Hoy is for horizontal lines. That's what the H stands for, horizontal lines. And then the O stands for the slope of 0, right? So this is the slope, which is 0, because an O kind of looks like a 0, right? And then the Y reminds you that the equation of a horizontal line is y equals some kind of number, okay? And that number is going to be the y values of all the points, okay? So that's why the Hoy kind of helps people remember horizontal lines. Whereas the vertical lines, we use the term Vux. And the V stands for vertical, for vertical line. And remember, vertical lines are straight up and down like this, whereas horizontal lines are like the horizon, kind of flat like that. Not curvy, but just flat. And then, of course, the slope of vertical line is undefined. We talked about that in a previous video as well. And then the equations for vertical lines start with an x, and it's going to be x equals some number. And that number is whatever your x values are for each of those points. Okay, let's try another one. Okay, it says since y equals mx plus b form, we can easily see that the slope of this equation is 7/2. So this is typically what a slope-intercept equation looks like. You're going to have numbers where the m and the b are, but you're not going to have numbers where the x, y are, because the x, y represents every point on that line. So that quantity won't be filled in for you because it represents all of the points on that line. Whereas the slope will be there, and also the y-intercept point, which we'll talk about what that is later on. Okay, I guess I need to erase all this so we can see what I've written here. Wrote my Hoy in the wrong spot. Okay, now we have a standard form equation, ax plus by equals c. Well, remember, to find the slope of a standard form equation, we take the a value, which in this case is the 2. That's the number next to the x. Again, standard form equations, the x and y are going to be there, but there will be a number in place of a, b, and c. Okay, and remember, you're supposed to take the the a value, which is this, the 2 is the a, right? You're supposed to change the sign of that a. Okay, so change the sign of the a and place it over the b value and divide it. And -2 divided by 1 is -2. So our slope on this line is -2. Now there is another way to find this, and that is to convert this equation, this in standard form, into slope-intercept form. I'm going to have a separate video showing you how to do that because we do need to know how to do that. And so we're going to be practicing that quite a bit. So I'll separate that in another video. But if you don't want to convert it into slope-intercept form and you just want to find a quick slope, that's one way to do it, is to change the sign of the A and divide it by the B number. So standard form, here's another example of standard form. And they've changed this into slope-intercept form and found the slope that way. So if you're confused about how they changed it, I will have that in a separate video. So just watch the converting video. All right. Great job, y'all. So remember that you can always use the slope formula to calculate the slope of a line by using 2 points that fall on the line. Use 2 exact points. That means they have to be on the line and be in a corner of one of those grid squares. Remember to read the points from left to right and use labels to help you write the numbers in the appropriate place in the formula. So label your first point x1, y1, label your second point x2, y2, and place them in the appropriate spots in the formula. Remember to simplify or reduce the ratio once you're finished. When dividing a negative numerator divided by a negative denominator, it'll make a positive slope. So remember, if you get one negative in your ratio, the whole slope is negative. But if you have a negative on the top and the bottom of that ratio and you divide it, you're going to get a positive. So just make it a positive. Remember to recognize the 4 types of linear equations we work with the most. The slope-intercept form, which is y = mx plus b. The standard form, ax plus by = c. And then the horizontal line equations, which is y = some number. And the vertical line equations, which is x = some number. And also remember to use the phrase Hoy Vux as a way to remember the information about horizontal and vertical lines. So that concludes our lesson on how to use the slope formula and how to identify slope from equations. And now it's time for me to say it was lovely teaching y'all math today.